Okay, we are going to begin the screencast today with FDR and Isolationism. So a few of my classes are ahead of this point, so you can just try to fast forward a little bit. We will begin talking about support for Britain. Most Americans supported Britain at the beginning stages of the war, but FDR was not ready to push America into war. America had returned to its isolationist policy, and FDR was afraid to stir the pot. What I mean is he was afraid to draw too much attention to America by outwardly and expressively supporting Great Britain and the other Allied powers during the war. So he really wanted to appear neutral, otherwise that target would have been placed on America. So, this is going to begin a passing of laws known as the Neutrality Acts. The Neutrality Acts were a series of laws passed between 1935 and 1937. One law in particular called for an embargo, which is the stopping of trade. Okay, called for an embargo against all arms sales to countries at war. Meaning the United States would no longer sell military weapons to countries at war. This did hurt the Allies, especially Britain. So eventually a revision was made that allowed the sale of arms on a cash and carry basis to Allied powers. Now the cash and carry basis, or the cash and carry system, has 2 points. 1, the United States would not transport the military weapons, so the Allied powers had to come get them from America. The United States would not transport the military weapons, so the Allied powers would have to come get them from America. The second point was that the weapons had to be paid for in full, and they would not be loaned to the Allied powers. So we're going to fast forward just a little bit. I'll go into more detail about this later in this screencast, as well as tomorrow in class. But eventually, France would fall to German control. And when that happens, Americans get very nervous. They're not all prepared to go to war, but they are becoming more and more nervous. There was now a split in America of 2 groups of people. One, the interventionists, and 2, the isolationists. So we have the interventionists and the isolationists. You can probably guess, but it's the interventionists that wanted to enter the war, wanted America to go to war, wanted to intervene, while the isolationists wanted to remain out of war. Now, eventually, we'll go under Selective Service Act now. Eventually, the interventionists would gain control over Congress, and they began passing acts that somewhat violated the Neutrality Acts. The first example of this was the Selective Service Act. Now, kind of remember what the first Selective Service Act we learned about was about. It was about the draft. Okay, and that's the same here. The Selective Service Act instituted a draft, but it was the first ever peacetime draft. And that is self-explanatory. America was not at war. The second piece of legislation we'll discuss is the Lend-Lease Act. This was passed in 1941, so kind of spreading out over time a little bit in these notes, but that's just to show you within this topic the changes that happened. Under the Lend-Lease Act, we began allowing Great Britain to purchase arms and weapons, well, not and weapons, they are weapons, arms or weapons, with a payment deferred until after the war, which means buy now and pay later. Payment deferred till after the war. A clear violation of what two things we just discussed: the Neutrality Acts and the cash and carry policy. Okay? It said they had to pay in full, and now they're allowing them to pay back after the war. But this just shows our growing support for Britain, and we are getting closer to mixing ourselves in with this war. Okay, I'm going to stop this screencast here, but you're not done yet. There is another screencast. I just want to make sure it recorded correctly before I go too much further. So stop here and download the next screencast.